How do you realistically change the social structure of these massive bureaucracies? How do you bring financial responsibilities to them?
Yeah, I think in the book, one of the things I say is we need to have a process for measuring success. So, for example, if we're talking about a bureaucracy that's trying to reduce crime, you say, okay, what is the goal we're going to have? Treat it like a business would treat their operation. What's the goals? What are the issues we have that are going to distract us and just take us away from achieving those goals? How are we going to measure success? What metrics are going to report? And then let's report on it on a regular basis so that we can see if we're moving in the right direction or not. And if not, we tweak it, or maybe we totally throw out that solution that we thought was going to do the trick and come up with something else.
Ron Vittori is a businessman and a CFO with experience in a variety of industries. He's also the author of Solutions or Socialism. His book answers the questions of how and why we're now at a pivotal point in our 250-year history. He explores our past with a hopeful eye to our future. Ron, welcome to Bump in the Road. If you would, tell us your story.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for having me. I know this is a little different story than most of your personal interest stories, and this is about a bump in the road, actually a pothole in the road for the United States. And it got me to write a book. And what got me to write the book was actually stories of people that I ran into who were not Native Americans, but came here from repressive regimes. And they were grateful for what we have, even though they saw that it was not perfect, but it was way better than what they had before. So, for example, in my book, the first person I talk about is named Lori, and she was in East Germany. Her father was a good middle class person with inventor. He had several patents. He had a factory where he produced goods. And then when the war came out, World War II, that was taken over by the communists, and life was entirely different. And she wound up having to go live with her grandmother so that her grandmother could get food rations because she had a child with her. So life in East Germany was really not good for Lori. Um, she actually was separated from her mother and her two sisters and her father. Her father actually left because the mother had a premonition that the Russians were going to come to the house and take him away. So she told him, I've packed your bags. You need to leave. And amazingly, he listened, because he just thought, well, if she tells me it's going to happen, she's been right before. So anyway, he left. And the next day, the Russians showed up at the door,
Oh,
took
man.
over their house, kicked them out of the house, the mother and the daughters, and also took over his factory. So instead of producing goods for consumption, they started producing military goods. So the father lost his business and, lost his relationship with his family, and also, fortunately, saved his life by leaving. And he was able to escape. And the mother moved in with a relative with the girls and stayed there for a while. And then at one point, she decided she was going to make a go for it and went to a bridge and somehow communicated with the father. He was underneath the bridge in West Germany, and she dropped one kid off the bridge. The father caught her. And then the second child, father caught her. And then a few days later, she found a way to bribe one of the guards on the bridge and with booze, and wound up being able to escape herself. So then Lori was able to get out in a different way. She was living with the grandmother. She crawled through a potato field with bullets flying overhead, because that's just the way the Germans and the Russians, I should say the Russians, were operating at that time, with wall being put up in East Germany. They would always be looking for people trying to escape. So they had to crawl on their hands and knees and stay extremely low. Her and her cousin managed to escape and somehow get paired back up with the family in West Germany. And that's where she wound up meeting her future husband, because the family then opened up a restaurant and bar, and met her future husband there, who was in the military, and wound up coming to the United States, and had a very long life with her husband, who passed away earlier this year. And she was so grateful, but she remembers her mother's dying words, which were, bad things are going to happen in this country, in the United States. She also had brought her mother and father over as well. And she says, be prepared.
Wow.
And so she remembers that today, and recognizes that her mother's words were ringing true. We have hit a big pothole in our journey to become the shining city on a hill, and we've been detoured from that.
Talk a little bit, in your book, you talk a little bit about these potholes. Each one is a book unto itself, actually. But let's look at them. One of the points you make is that our founding principles have been absolutely corrupted or ignored.
Right. And many scholars have listed that there are at least 25 founding principles, and we're not going to go through 25. And for the book, I've actually slimmed that down to 12 that I think are the most consequential. And two of them relate to institutions. So the first point I'd bring up here is quality education is mandated and essential for survival. That was one of the founding principles. And there's no doubt that we have put our money there. In the whole world, we spend the most per pupil in education. And so what's been the results? Well, the latest survey shows that out of the 78 most developed countries in the world, we rank 34th in math proficiency. So it's not for lack of funding. The money is there, but the results are not. So our education founding principle has been corrupted. We are not meeting the mark there.
Education is so foundational. I was with some people over the weekend, and one of them was a young man looking at some, I think they were community college courses, or maybe they were college courses. At any rate, he was talking about a class he was going to take on the history of rock and roll. Now, that sounds like fun, I have to say. History of rock and roll would be great, but this is a college course. You have to understand my background. I went to Penn and Wharton way back when, and before everything has morphed into what it was today. It was extremely quantitative. You had to know it was a tough education, and I'm very grateful for that. I I don't know what has happened. Things have become so soft in so many ways. I took a class when I was in New Orleans for a year, and 2 classes actually, and they essentially were regurgitate what we tell you. I've never in my life had an exam where I had to regurgitate something. I had to think and find a solution.
Yeah, it's a different world today, with people graduate high school without any skills for living. They don't know how to balance a checkbook. They don't know how to have good, healthy relationships with other people. Um, there's ill prepared. All we're trying to do is push them along the conveyor belt to college, where they get the kind of courses you just talked about, as opposed to, let me take courses that are going to help me in whatever career I'm going into, as opposed to just amusing things, which may I guess, be good if I'm going to be a barista at Starbucks, but I don't know that that'll help me in other jobs. Well, let me talk about the second institutional problem, and that is a healthy family unit was considered fundamental for the viability of our society. When we look back at life in the 40s or 50s, especially through movies, we may laugh and chuckle about how bizarre things looked back then. But if you compare family life today with increasing levels of divorce, people delaying or not getting married at all, um, minimal family time together, and all the distractions we have to take us away from family time, things like social media, porn, excessive focus on entertainment and sports. There's no question our family life has suffered from what it used to be.
I think our society has suffered in a variety of ways. I think families are all dysfunctional in their own way, regardless of a point in time. Okay.
Yes.
But I think one of the issues we face now is that we're externally oriented. We're always reacting to something on social media. Much of what's
Mm,
on social media is fake. So you're reacting to something fake. It's la la land.
mm.
And I think we need to be living from the inside out, find out what our core values are, our core issues, if you will, and resolve them. And from that wealth of experiential knowledge, move out into the world. But we're doing the exact opposite. And as a result, on a social and emotional level and spiritual level, we're not evolving.
Mm. Absolutely right. Yeah, I wish I could say more about that, and I could, but it would take us a long time to get through that. Let me switch gears to citizenry. There's a couple of points here from our founding principles that uh, we've corrupted. We have inalienable rights that do not flow from the government. The government cannot grant us those rights, nor can it take those away. That was one of the foundational principles.
Mhm.
And yet, if we look at religious freedom, um, our pursuit of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, who would say that those things haven't taken a hit, especially in the last few years? Um, the kind of anti-Semitism we see rising around the country. There's no question that this is also another founding principle that has gone off the rails.
Well, and I would add to that financial mismanagement on a national scale.
Mm,
We're seeing inflation. Um, Like we haven't seen in many, many years since the late
mm.
'70s, early '80s. That becomes a serious social and economic issue. I think that our institutions are have grown beyond a useful point.
Mm,
As we're right now we're recording this, it is March of 2025,
mm.
and Elon Musk is running through the various, institutions. Whether you think that's good or bad, I think that we're all seeing that our funds are not well used and that we don't have a well-run government from any sort of business perspective.
Well, let me jump then to the government heavily related items, because one of them is exactly what you're talking about. One of the foundational principles was federal debt was considered to be toxic to freedom, and it was just like being taken over by another country. That's the way our founding fathers thought. And it was intended for economic crises, and it was also intended for wars, and was supposed to be repaid as soon as possible after those situations. But who hasn't seen the national debt clock? Does it look like it's getting repaid?
No, I
maybe
don't
with
think so.
maybe with Elon Musk's efforts, maybe we will start doing that. But I'm just saying, up until now, the national debt just keeps climbing and climbing, and there's been no end in sight. So we have not taken into account the institutions that we've created in the federal bureaucracy and managed them well at all. And it has been financially choking us.
Yeah, I have to agree, and I think you see that reflected in society as a whole. in that many people rely on their credit cards. Part of it may be economic with the inflation we've seen recently, particularly, but I think it's kind of an American habit to live beyond your means.
Unfortunately, I mean, I'm old school. I mean, I remember that you only would incur debt maybe for a car, certainly for a house purchase, and then try to pay it off as soon as you could. And unfortunately, that's not the society we live in today. Um, People are using credit cards to buy groceries. Um,
To take
and
vacations.
yeah, and then paying that huge interest rate. And it's like they get into this mess financially because they can. And it seems so easy.
And
So,
I
yeah.
would argue our federal government's the same. They have seem to have an absolute inability to understand fundamental principles of money, frankly. The fact that we can't even pass an audit, we don't even know where our money is going. This is crazy. This is absolutely crazy.
Well, and because we are the reserve currency of the world, at least still at this
For now.
point, that means we can print money with no end in sight because it's not backed ever since we got off the gold standard. It's not backed by anything but the full faith and credit of the United States. Um, so having the reserve currency moniker behind us means that we can not have to be prudent with our money. And we certainly haven't been. And I think we should think like a team that's behind in a game, and that we always have to, do our best to conserve our energy, score more points, and keep moving forward. If we keep thinking we're playing from behind, that would be better than like, we're the reserve currency of the world. We don't have to worry because it could be snatched away from us in a blinking of an eye. And if that happens, that would be huge economic consequences for us. So thankfully, people like Musk are putting us on the right path to be more financially disciplined. So
Well,
it's a great
I think
point you're bringing up.
I think he's just bringing up information. He's not involved in management or anything. He's simply providing information.
Hmm.
And I think that you need good financial information to make good financial decisions. And if we've been operating without any financial information, we've been operating without any care to have the information, just printing money to do whatever. I think, I suspect that we're at a bit of a turning point where those days may be diminishing, if not coming to an end.
Well, for sure, we're at a turning point, and it's a matter of which fork in the road we're going to stay on. I mean, we certainly have made a shift away from the path we have been following, and let's hope we continue on that path because that is a better way. Um, and I hope you're absolutely right because the alternative is not very good.
No, we were talking before you came on, um, and one of the things I loved about your book, I love the stories at the beginning, just like the story you told about escaping from East Germany, because they paint a very terrifying but real picture of what life was like behind the Iron Curtain or in any communist-run
Mm,
country. And I can remember as a kid being in Prague, not long after the Russians invaded. There were tanks everywhere, everybody was armed, but what stuck in
mm,
my mind most of all was this long line of people. Everybody looked like they were dressed in dull brown or gray, and they were waiting to get into a shop to get some piece of food.
mm.
And I've never forgotten that. And for me, that so sums up why we don't wanna go that more socialistic communist route.
Yeah, yeah. You're absolutely right. And one of the other stories is from somebody who lived in Ukraine when it was part of the Soviet Union, and she had the same kind of experience you're talking about, where people had this morose look on their face and downtrodden. And when she wound up emigrating to the United States, she was surprised to see people smiling and happy and totally different than what she experienced. So that kind of lifestyle in the communist and authoritarian countries is not anything we should ever want to get anywhere close to in terms of our country.
You know, you talk about a lot of the power divides in your book and where power resides. And one of the things you point out is that most rights actually should rest within the states. Will you talk about that a little bit? Because I'm not sure where we stand in that continuum right now.
Yeah, we were supposed to be a limited representative republic. That was the design of the founding fathers. And if you look at, you'd have to say most rights don't rest in the state. Most rights of any significance rest with the federal government. And unfortunately, the federal government was supposed to be three co-equal branches. But when you really take a look at it, who's really running the show is judges that have lifetime appointments and bureaucrats who are embedded in our institutions of government, our agencies, and they've basically neutered Congress and the presidency. So that's what's really running the country today, not three co-equal branches of government, is the bureaucrats and the lifetime appointed judges. And it's a shame because that's not at all what the founding principles envisioned at all.
What?
So
Yeah, no,
I
go
was
ahead.
going to say, if you look at some of the federal agencies, one of the things that I was shocked in my research to find out is some of the administrative federal agencies have become militarized. And I thought, how can that be? So if you look at www.openthebooks.com, there's a report dated May 1st, 2023, called The Militarization of the U.S. Executive Agencies. And I'll just give you two examples from that. The IRS has 4,500 guns, and it has some of those include submachine guns and shotguns, and they have 5 million rounds of ammunition. Does your kinder, friendlier IRS need all of that weaponry? Also, there are 200,000 federal agents with arrest and firearm authority. That is more than the whole United States Marine Corps of 186,000. So, if you look at how our government is today, does it all rest with the majority rest with the states? Not with this kind of militarization, not with this kind of interventionist judges and bureaucrats that are running things. This is not at all how the government was supposed to be.
To what extent do we need to evolve with the times?
Yeah, I think we need to evolve with movement away from where we had the path we have been put on. We have been slowly marching down this road to a bad ending. And I think we need to evolve. If you look at what's happened in some countries, like in Italy, the prime minister there is very much more centrist, more trying to do the kind of things I would say that we're trying to do now, which is reduce the regulation, reduce the inefficiency of government. And so there are models out there already of some countries that have made some changes.
One of the things I find kind of interesting talking about this kind of huge monolithic bureaucratic system that runs so much of this country. And yet this country is so big and so diverse that it almost seems contrarian to me. Let me give you an example. I'm from the East Coast. I'm living in the West. When 9/11 happened and the towers came down, obviously everybody was very
Mm,
emotional and upset. But I was living in a place where many people had never been to New York. And so they
mm,
went about their lives. And I think you can see that repeated again and again. You can see hurricanes in Florida, but many people have never been to Florida. They live in a totally
mm.
different location. I think that we live regionally, and I think this large government umbrella that we have over us is almost in I'm not sure that it works with the reality of how we live. Somebody in Idaho doesn't have much in common with somebody in New York City. Somebody in
Right.
Maine doesn't have much in common with somebody in Florida.
Mhm.
How do you try to homogenize that?
Well, what you do is you push some of this back to the states. So I know there's a talk about taking some agencies and actually just making them more visible in the states than they are at the federal level, because the federal level is going to be bureaucratic, and anytime the federal government has to do something locally, there's all this travel expense, for example. And whereas if it was done locally already, you wouldn't have all that travel expense, and it would be more effective because it would be taking into consideration what's going on. So like you said, in Florida, hurricanes is something you just know and you have to prepare for. And once they come, you have to be prepared. How do you get out of that? How do you help the people that are in need? And wouldn't the local people be more in tune with that than the supposedly omniscient federal government, who should know all and take care of all? They can't. And so I think that's a good move in the right direction. If we take some of these agencies and push that back to the states with some of that federal funding to help.
It all comes down to people. And one of the things you write about is that free people have to stay strong to survive. And I think that that is a really important point. And one of the things you mentioned is physical strength. Talk
Yeah.
about that a little.
Yeah. There are several dimensions. What do you mean by strong? And I think physical strength is a good one. 42% of adults 20 and older are obese, and nearly 74% are considered overweight. So are we physically strong? 22% of youth age 12 to 19 are obese.
Hmm.
So when you think about physical strength, and how many of these people would not be qualified to get in the military based on their financial fitness? It's sad what we've allowed to happen. So make America healthy again is a step in the right direction.
Well, particularly for young people, it's I think it's really important to establish some good habits and also to be exposed to a lot of things that can pop up in your life. For example, sports. I think it's important to be exposed to a whole variety of things. Maybe it's tennis, golf, track, team sports, whatever. But the reason for that is not only do you learn through sports a lot of life skills, but fast forward 20 or 30 years, you're middle aged. If you've been exposed to some sports before, you may be motivated to pick them up again.
Mm,
So I think that physical strength, that physical wellness is something really important to instill in young people because it's experiential. They've done it. They've played tennis, they skied, they played baseball. They can do that again.
mm. And to your point, doing competitive sports, you also learn about teamwork. You learn
Yeah.
about winning and losing, and not just collecting a participation trophy, but the joy of victory and the learning process when you've been defeated. Those are good characteristics to help you in life. So sport isn't just about getting physically fit, but it also helps you emotionally.
Yeah, no, I agree. One of the other okay, there you have 4 items in terms of what we need to do to be strong to survive. The next one is mental strength.
Yeah, we've already talked about our schools are failing our kids. There's no question. I mean, when you look at test scores and how we compete internationally, mentally, we're not preparing our kids. And we have too many ways of people escaping reality with diversions. We talked about whether it's excessive social media, whether it's porn, whether it's just being consumed with television and sports and then other entertainment. People just want to escape, and that doesn't position you to be mentally strong.
Now, and it's hard. Um, I for one I have been known to go down numerous rabbit holes on the web, and it just sucks your time. It's just incredible. And mostly it's not productive. Sometimes I come up with something interesting. But the thing is, it becomes habitual.
Mhm.
And one of the things I see it in myself. And one of the things I've had to do is I've had to limit my time in the morning in terms of reading, going through,
Mm,
events and things like that. I put a hard limit on it. And later in the day, at the end of the day, if I want to pick it up again, then I can. But otherwise, I would find myself spending literally hours going through news and Substacks and this
mm,
and that. And it's very seductive. And the other thing I've seen in terms of mental strength is the presence of AI. Now, I use AI, particularly in some post production aspects of this podcast, and it has reduced my production time by about 60 to 70%.
mm,
So it's been incredibly valuable in that regard. However, um, what it I'm finding it actually a little bit frustrating because it means you get an AI summary, you edit it, you move it over, but you're not putting in the mental energy to be creative and
mm,
discerning and to actually create something from scratch. And I see that also as a huge problem. I think we need to nurture our creativity and our inquisitiveness so that we can create. We're not
mm,
going to be creating if we're just being led by the nose by
mm.
AI.
Good point. Sounds like you could do an episode just on that.
Yeah, it's not all good, it's not all bad, it's a matter of how you use it, and I think it's also a matter of being self-aware in terms of how you are reacting to it, and then asking yourself, "Is this where I wanna be?" Then we have emotional strength. Another really good one. Let's talk about emotional strength.
Well, I'll mention a few things and you tell me if you think that shows we're emotionally strong. Um, Participation trophies, people focused on victimhood, people doing anonymous trolling of people that they don't like or have different opinions than, uh, running to safe spaces. Is that really reflective of emotionally strong people? I don't think so. And hopefully, we are starting to move away from that kind of thinking. That's not, you talk about rabbit holes, those are not the rabbit holes we want to live in.
No, and, whatever happened to agreeing to disagree?
Yeah, we've just agreed to be disagreeable, is what it sounds like it's happening now.
I fear you're right about that. But, unless you talk to people, even if you disagree with them, you don't know where they stand. You don't know what they really
Mm,
think. You don't know what their constructs are. So, I think it becomes important to not only have a strong sense of who you are, but to be open to, listening to different points of view, and you don't have to agree. You can just agree to disagree. We've done this for years. Who is it? Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan talk about two people who disagreed on things, but they
yep.
were great friends.
Yeah, yeah. On a personal level, we had in our previous home we lived in a neighbor, our next door neighbor, who we were really close to and really liked. And when she found out our politics, she says, "I'm going to have to unfriend you." And it's like, okay, that's the way you roll. Like, okay, but that's not the kind of country we were. We always used to be where you could have different points of view and still, like you said, not be disagreeable with each other. But when somebody can't tolerate you or accept you as a friend anymore just because you have a different political view than them, that's why we see families have trouble when they
Mhm.
have big gatherings because their people will have different opinions about things. And why can't you just accept each other and be happy with each other as friends and family? That's what, why are you going to let political or ideology just divide you and turn you against each other?
I
We
think,
need to move away from that.
yeah, no, I agree. And I think a lot of our different opinions are based on different informational sources.
Mm,
I think if one group of people read ABC and another group of people read XYZ and that's all they know, of course they're going to disagree.
right. Well, and that's why you see people consuming news not just from ABC and NBC or whatever. They will look at podcasts and get their news in different forms than how they used to in the past. So that
Well,
monopoly by the major networks is not there anymore.
No, if you just look at the viewership, the legacy media is dead.
Mm.
I mean, w look at somebody like Joe Rogan, um, any of these alternate news sources that get far more eyeballs than any of the
Mhm.
legacy media, and that has to make you stop and ask, "Gee, how do I disseminate information?" Now it's disseminated from a whole variety of different places and voices, and I think if you want to, it's easier than ever to hear a lot of different voices.
Mhm. Yeah, and you're right though that some of these people should be open to hearing from other voices as opposed to just living in the bubble that they're in.
Now, the fourth point you bring up is moral strength. In terms of free people need to stay strong to survive, they need moral strength.
Yeah, it used to be that we would take a look at authoritarian regimes and be very wary of them and recognize that they do not present a good outcome for their own people or for the rest of the world. We've lost that moral compass. I mean, if you think of what happened after October 7th in Israel, I mean, the day after that slaughter of 1,200 people happened, you had college students in the United States going out and calling the Jews genocidal maniacs. It's we've lost our moral compass. The people who were the victims are being called the perpetrators. It's like, how is that possible? It's like calling the rape victim responsible for the rape. It's like that's totally wrong. So we unfortunately don't have the moral strength we used to have.
Well, and I think that lack of moral strength pervades at all levels. I mean, there are, you know, you look at the conspiracy theories. I once had a friend who was into conspiracy theories, and I used to tease him about it relentlessly. Well, I have changed my mind. Now, when a conspiracy theory comes up, I kind of revel in it for 2 or 3 weeks because I know in 4 to 6 weeks it'll be true. And we live in such a convoluted world anymore. We don't even know what's true. If we don't know what's true, how do we have moral direction?
Mm. Well, we should have our own absolutes built into us, but unfortunately, too often we're told everything is relative, and there are no absolutes. So, just like I said about authoritarian regimes, those should be moral absolutes for us. We should recognize that that's not good for the people of those countries, and it's not good for the world either. But we don't often have that moral compass within ourselves that should be there. Instead, we buy into the fact that, well, everything's relative. There are no really right and wrong or good or evil. It's all kind of relative. Everything's a shade of gray.
Where can the US go?
Well, I would hope that we want to become the shining city on a hill that was our first thought when we were being founded, that we should be an example to the rest of the world. We should be an exceptional country.